In the winter of 1921, inside the frozen, hollowed-out shell of what was once a vibrant Russian factory, a terrifying realization struck the architects of the New World. The Bolshevik Revolution had promised a utopia where money would be obsolete, and resources would be shared equally by command. They had executed the bankers, burned the stock certificates, and seized the grain. But instead of abundance, they were met with a silence so profound it was deafening, the silence of stopped machinery and the eerie quiet of a starving population. 5 million people were perishing, not because of a lack of effort, but because of a mathematical impossibility. At that specific moment, Vladimir Lenin, the man who had waged war on the very concept of profit, had to admit a secret defeat that ideology could not bury. You can outlaw the capitalists, but you cannot outlaw the invisible laws of supply and demand. It was the first stark lesson in a century defined by economic extremes that an economy without a price signal is like a body without a nervous system. It cannot feel pain, so it inevitably destroys itself. Before we uncover these hidden ledgers and the systemic collapses that followed, make sure you are subscribed to Deep Financial Story. Here, we decode the history that money doesn't want you to know. To truly understand the titanic struggle between capitalism and socialism, we must look past the flags and the speeches. We must look at the invisible villain lurking beneath the surface of both systems. In the early 20th century, this villain was not a person, but a mechanism of control, a trap set by the arrogance of those who believed they could tame the chaotic beast of human desire. In the East, the trap was the calculation problem. When the state took over the ledgers, they severed the connection between production and reality. In a free market, a rising price is a distress flare. It tells the world, we need more of this. It triggers innovation and redistribution naturally. But in the planned economy of the Soviet experiment, there were no prices, only quotas. A bureaucrat sitting in a heated office in Moscow would decide how many shoes a factory in the Urals should produce. He would order 10,000 pairs. The factory manager, terrified of the secret police and needing to meet the quota to save his own life, would produce 10,000 shoes. But to save on materials and time, he might make them all exclusively in size 9 or use cardboard instead of leather. The quota was met. The ledger was balanced. The headline read, "Success." But in reality, the shoes were useless, and the people walked barefoot in the snow. This was the invisible rot of central planning, a system drowning in data but starved of truth. However, while the East was suffocating under the weight of forced order, the West was busy constructing its own magnificent disaster. Across the ocean, the 1920s in America were roaring with a different kind of insanity. If the socialist trap was the denial of human greed, the capitalist trap was the weaponization of it, the invisible villain. In the West was a new financial innovation that would fundamentally rewire the human brain, the normalization of debt. Before this era, if you wanted a radio or a car, you saved your wages until you could afford it. But the financial elites of Wall Street realized that patience was bad for business. They introduced the installment plan and the margin account. Suddenly, the average factory worker could buy a slice of the American dream with money he didn't have. This created a financial hallucination. The stock market began to detach from reality. A company's value was no longer based on the steel it forged or the railroads it laid, but on the speculation of what it might be worth tomorrow. The banks fueled this fire by lending money to buy stocks, using the stocks themselves as collateral. It was a snake eating its own tail. The public saw a never-ending ladder to the sky, unaware that the rungs were made of paper. This era was the birth of the consumer trance. The system relied on the perpetual expansion of credit. It required the population to remain in a state of constant want, filling the void with goods purchased on promises. While the Soviet citizen waited in line for bread because the state couldn't produce enough, the American citizen waited in line for the newest gadget because the banks had produced too much money. Both populations were being manipulated, one by the whip of the state, the other by the seduction of the loan. By 1929, the tension in the mathematical fabric of the West had reached a breaking point. The invisible villain, that accumulation of bad debt and leverage, was ready to collect. The crash that followed wasn't just a market correction, it was a revelation. It revealed that unregulated capitalism, when fueled by artificial credit, becomes a Ponzi scheme where the last ones in pay for the exit of the elite. The Great Depression that followed mirrored the misery of the Soviet famines, proving that starvation can happen just as easily in a system of surplus as it can in a system of scarcity, provided the distribution mechanism is broken enough. We are often taught history as a binary choice. The good system won, and the bad system lost. But the ledger of history tells a more complex story. It shows us that both pure command and pure chaos lead to the same destination: the centralization of power. In the East, power condensed into the party. In the West, it condensed into the banks. In both cases, the average individual became a cog in a machine they couldn't control. The terrifying reality is that the flaws of the 1920s and 30s were never truly fixed. They were merely patched over with more complex financial instruments and louder political rhetoric. The debt cycles we see today, the disconnection between the stock market and the real economy, and the increasing calls for centralized control over resources. These are not new phenomena. They are the ghosts of the past, reassembled in modern clothing. As we stand here today, looking at global supply chains that are fracturing and a financial system that is leveraged to the hilt, we have to ask ourselves, have we actually learned the lesson of the hidden ledger? Or are we simply sleepwalking through the second act of a tragedy written 100 years ago? The trap that was set then is still active, and the invisible villain has only grown more sophisticated, waiting for the moment when the music stops once again. Out of the ashes of the Great Depression and the radioactive smoke of World War II, the world stumbled upon a quiet truce. For a few brief decades, the extremists on both sides were silenced by the sheer necessity of survival. We entered what historians often call the golden age of capitalism, but a closer look reveals it was actually a hybrid engine. The West realized that the market was the greatest engine for wealth creation, but it was a terrible engine for social stability. So, they installed brakes, unions, social security, and banking regulations. They didn't kill the invisible hand. They simply put a glove on it. For a time, this balance worked. A factory worker in Detroit could buy the car he built, and a teacher could afford a home on a single salary. The ledgers were honest. Money was still tethered to gold, meaning governments couldn't simply hallucinate wealth into existence. But peace is often the breeding ground for complacency, and the invisible villain was evolving. It realized that if it couldn't control the people through force, and it couldn't enslave them through simple debt, it would have to change the very nature of money itself. The pivotal moment came in 1971, when the gold standard was abandoned, the anchor was cut. The global economy drifted away from the solid ground of hard assets and floated into the nebulous clouds of fiat currency. This shifted the war from capitalism versus socialism to something far more insidious. Asterisk, the real economy versus the financial economy. Asterisk, in this new era, the definitions began to blur. We saw the rise of a strange mutation, corporate socialism. Large entities became too big to fail, protected by the state's money printer, while small businesses were left to face the brutal winds of the free market alone. Profits were privatized, but losses were socialized. This wasn't the capitalism of Adam Smith, and it wasn't the socialism of Karl Marx. It was a system of extraction, designed to transfer wealth from the holders of currency, the savers workers, to the holders of assets, the elite. This explains the mystery that haunts the modern worker. Why, with all our technological advancements, with AI and automation, does it feel harder to survive today than it did 50 years ago? The answer lies in the corrupted ledger. We have created a world where money is abundant, but value is scarce. The inflation we fear isn't just about the price of milk rising, it's about the value of your labor dissolving. So, what actually worked? History gives us a clear answer, if we are brave enough to read it. What worked was decentralization. The systems that survived were the ones that allowed millions of individuals to make their own choices, sending millions of tiny price signals that corrected the market in real time. What failed, time and time again, was centralization, the arrogance of a few believing they could calculate the needs of the many. Whether that was done by a Politburo in Moscow setting grain quotas, or a central bank in the West setting interest rates to manipulate stock prices. The systems that worked were those anchored in reality, where money represented proof of work, not just a promise of future payment. The systems that failed were those that embraced the illusion of free lunches, whether through the printing press or the gulag. We are now living through the friction of a dying cycle. The labels of left and right are becoming increasingly useless artifacts of the 20th century. The real battle line today is drawn between those who want to control the ledger and those who want to be free of it. The invisible villain thrives in complexity, in the fine print of bailouts and the fog of inflation. Your defense against this is not a political party. It is financial literacy. It is understanding that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The trap is always the same. The promise of security in exchange for your agency. The solution is always the same. ownership, critical thinking, and the refusal to let others calculate your worth. The story of money is the story of us. And now that you can see the hidden ledger, you can finally start writing your own entry. This is deep financial story. The history is deep, but the future is yours to write.